Hello world, and welcome back to the channel. Now, in our object-oriented programming series, we are going to continue to part 2 today. The lesson today is going to be strictly on constructors and encapsulation. Now, allow me to explain something before we even begin. A constructor is a special method that we use to initialize a new object's state when it is created using the new keyword. As of our last class, we actually did that at this point here. We normally say that when we add a new and then the bank account together with the brackets, we're actually invoking the constructor of the bank account class. Now, the characteristics or the properties when it comes to a constructor is it must have the same name as the class, and it does not have a return type, even void. It's a special kind of method. So its work is just to build or to construct details about the class. The second part that we're going to tackle today is encapsulation. Now, encapsulation is a practice of bundling data or fields and the methods that operate on that data into a single unit. And that single unit is simply the class, while restricting direct access to some of the object's components. Now, when it comes to implementation, how we're going to do it, we're going to declare some class variables, actually all the class variables as private, just to hide direct outside access. Now, we are also going to provide public getter and setter methods, and those two methods are going to be used to view and also to modify these variables in a controlled manner. As of our last class, there is a roadblock that we hit on purpose. This part here, if you recall, we had to comment out the code and then just test it and see the outcome that we get. Now, if we rerun it again, just to refresh what we got last time, just run it real quick. Okay, so you will notice that the balance is currently reading a negative figure. So today we're actually going to make that impossible. And to make that impossible, the first thing that I would like us to do is get rid of everything that we had in the bank account class, because I want us to build it afresh. Now, with encapsulation, we've talked about having private fields. So that's the very first thing that we're going to do. We're going to create those private fields here, and they are more or less the same thing that we had. So we were sorry, this is private. We had account number, rows number 1. We had account holder, rows number 2. We also had the balance. We make it private as well. It was a double balance. Yeah. Then today I would like us to include an integer that is going to count the number of transactions that we've made. So let's call it transaction count. There. So the key thing here is that nobody outside this particular class can touch these 4 variables directly anymore. That's not allowed. Now, number 2, earlier we didn't have the constructor, but I would like us to now create the constructor. So here's how we're going to do it. Public bank account. So an account, as a rule, an account has to be created with the account number and the account holder's name. So to make sure that the constructor enforces that behavior, we're going to come in here and we're going to give it two parameters, account number and account holder. There. Then the other thing, balance always has to start at 0. So in actual sense, no one opens any account that has money in it. So you'll open the account and then you'll deposit later. So in order for us to make sure that these two are known throughout this particular class, what we're going to do is we're going to assign whatever we receive from those two parameters to our instance variables up here, those private members. So we're going to do this. Let me just explain in a moment. Account number first, and then account number, sorry, just a moment. Yeah, account number. So allow me to explain. When we use this as a keyword or the keyword, we are actually trying to access a member of this particular class. The dot is normally called a member access specifier according to OOP terminologies. So the account number that comes first is our instance variable, followed by the parameter. Since we are using an IDE, you'll actually notice that the color coding is different. But just to bring out that particular difference, I can just do that so that we can differentiate which account number and which account holder we are referring to. So we'll do the same for account holder. Then we're going to come here and assign that account holder right there. We've talked about the balance starting at 0. That is always the norm. Then we can as well initialize this particular transaction number or transaction count variable, and we also start at 0 for that. Now let's create getters. A getter is also called an accessor. Simply, it's going to be accessing or reading the value of a particular variable. Now, as a rule, a getter must have a return type, and the return type has to be the same as the data type of that particular variable up here. So since we're using an IDE, again, things are actually made easier because I can just right click, assuming it will behave. It doesn't want to behave. Okay, we can just create them, no problem. But there's a way the IDE can generate this for us. So let's start with account number. The point here is that it has to have a return type that is the same type as our variable data type up there, and then we simply return the value that is held at our instance variable there. Account, sorry, if I can only spell. Then we move on to the next one. This is account holder. Sorry, it's supposed to be get account holder. Then we simply return the value that is going to be held by the account holder instance variable that is up there. Moving on, we go to the balance. So the balance is a double. So public, and then we're going to have the return type, and we're going to have the get balance method right there. Then we're going to return the value that is held by our instance variable, which is balance. Then finally, get transaction count is going to be an integer. So the return type transaction count there, and then we're going to return transaction count, the instance variable that is up there. So those are our getters. The key point here is that since these variables are currently private, we have to give them access, or we have to give outside classes access to them, and we do that by creating public setters and getters. What we have first is getters. Now we will not require setters. Why? Because we have tackled that at the constructor level up here. So we won't need a setter for sorry, actually not all of them. We won't need a setter for account number, that is number 1 here. We won't need a setter for account number, because once it has been created it will never change. That's the rule. Then we also won't need a setter for the balance. Why? The balance is only supposed to change through a deposit or a withdrawal. For the account holder, it is possible for us to have a setter. Very possible, and we actually won't be causing any problems. For the transaction count, we are also going to require a setter for that. So let's just go right ahead and create a setter for account holder first. The general rule about setters is that they are not expected to return anything. We are simply assigning a value to a variable. So it's going to be void. Then we're going to have set account holder there. Then by default, or the rule still states that this particular method is going to have a parameter, and the parameter is going to be the same type as our instance variable. So I can actually just use account holder. The scope of this variable is just within this method. So once we move out of the method, this account holder will not be usable or ceases to be usable. So we're going to kick it off with some validation. Very important. So if the account holder, which is this parameter that we have here, is null, or account holder, if you take that string, and then you recall we talked about these string methods in our previous video before we started OOP. So you trim it, or rather we trim it, and then we simply check whether it is empty. So simply put, does account holder have a value when this function was called? If it doesn't have a value, that is not allowed. So at this point, what we're going to do is simply print out something. So account name or account holder name cannot be empty. That is what we're going to print out. Then we're going to return at this point. But otherwise, if it has a value, we take the instance variable account holder, and then we come and assign the value that we're going to be receiving through our parameter there. Then we can as well just display the name just for good measure. So account holder name updated to, and then we can have account holder there. Okay, so that is the first setter for the account holder. Now next, in the last class we had talked about the deposit method, we had talked about the withdraw method, and then we had the print statement method. Now let's go ahead and create them. In this particular view, we are going to think of them as they're actually the business methods. We're not thinking about them as the business methods. They're actually the business methods. So let's start with deposit. So public void deposit. Then we are going to give it a parameter amount. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake, slight mistake there. Amount right there. Then first thing that we're going to start with is validation. We need to ensure that the object protects itself. Remember, okay, let me first have this, and then we can discuss. Sorry. So if amount is less than or equal to 0, remember initially this is where this is what necessitated for us to now go back and rethink the bank account class. It is impossible for us to have either a 0 or a below 0 deposit. Not allowed. So the object has to protect itself. Then at this point, deposit failed, amount must be greater than 0. That's the rule. Then at this point we return as well. Then from there we simply take balance. So the object has already protected itself. At this point we actually not assuming, but we know that the amount is not 0 or below 0. So balance, we take current balance, and then we add the amount that this person is going to have deposited. Then we increment the transaction count variable. Remember, this one is just to keep track. How many times have we transacted? Then we can simply have, let's see, we can have print line statements at this point. So deposit successful, then something else. Let's say we display the amount, the amount deposited, and then I'm going to display that variable. Then from there we finally display the account balance. So new balance, then we display the balance there. Okay, that's our first business method. So just for good measure, let's just create a blank line below there. We also had the second method, which was withdraw. It was also void, then withdraw. In withdraw, we as well require that this person is going to specify the amount that they are going to be withdrawing. So amount there. Okay, we always have to begin with validation. So in the validation that we're going to be doing, this is going to be check 1 or validation check 1. The amount has to be positive. So we are actually going to repeat this right there. So if the amount is less than or equal to 0, the withdrawal has failed. Amount must be greater than 0, and then we return. Excuse me. So we also have the second validation. So validation number 2 is you cannot withdraw more than the balance. So if the amount that you're trying to withdraw is greater than the account balance, then you're not allowed anyway. So let's just have this. Maybe I can copy this just to have it on the clipboard. So withdraw failed, insufficient funds. That's the first message that we're going to give. Then let's maybe point out the requested amount. Let's just assume we're going to give it in dollars. So the requested amount is that, and then we can as well display the current balance. So available balance is that figure. So we're just pointing out to this person, but assuming that the transaction is going to be successful, the withdraw request, we simply take balance. Let's actually write this a different way, like that. So we just negate the amount from the balance. Then we also increment the transaction count variable there. Remember, we're just keeping track of how many times have we transacted. So withdraw, successful. Let's say, how are we going to put this? Amount withdrawn, and then we display the amount there. Then the new balance. After this person has withdrawn that particular amount, the new balance is that. Finally, the last business method that we're going to have is the print statement method. Print statement there. We didn't require any parameters, any return type, so let's just go right ahead and so in here I'm going to have the quotation. Sorry, I keep making that mistake. Okay, let's maybe just underline so account statement, and we as well just underline right there. Then for our statement, we are just going to print out everything. So account number, then we append the instance variable that we called account number. We move on to the second one, which was account holder, and then the instance variable that we called account holder comes in there. Then what was next? The balance. So balance, then finally, how many times have we transacted? So transactions, okay, I was supposed to have that, transactions, and then we have transaction count there. So we can as well just add something here just for good measure. somewhere there should be fine. Then excuse me, we can just add a new print line down there. So that's the current state of the bank account class. Remember, we were just trying to solve a problem that actually we had created, because it's us who had created. For this class now, let's do it in how many ways? Let's see. Let me just remove all that. Let me retain that part right there. So we're going to do it in 4 different bits. So demo 1, this is going to be representing the normal usage of that particular class. So in the normal usage, probably let's have a print line coming in first that is going to display this normal usage. Yeah, then maybe a print line. Then now we come here. So let's see the normal usage. Remember, we had account in our constructor. Account number came in first, followed by the account holder. So we start with the account number. I'm just going to assume, because it's a string, as long as it's in the quotation marks, then this is John. So we start by depositing some amount in there. Let's say 100. Then we also deposit again. Sorry. Let's say we deposit 500 this time. Then we try and withdraw, say 200. Sorry, withdraw 200. Then for this, we can call the print statement method, and we are done with demo 1. This is how we're going to handle it. Let's not run it immediately. Let's go through all scenarios and then we run it together. So we have demo 2 here. In demo 2, let's try to break the account. Let's try to break the account. So let me just copy those 3 lines. I'll just come and paste them there. Let's say, okay, this one was supposed to start with demo 1. So at this point we also have demo 2, breaking attempts. Okay, so this one we are also going to change to account 2. This is going to be account 002. Let's say this one belongs to Jane. Now in account 2, first things first, let's deposit. Sorry, account 2. Then we call the deposit function. Let's say we deposit 1,000. Then in our attempt to break the account, we're going to be trying to deposit a negative figure, so negative 500. Then we also try to withdraw more than the balance. Currently the balance is at 1,000. So if if I was to attempt to withdraw that figure, 9,999, obviously that's not allowed. Then we also try to withdraw a 0. That's not allowed as well. Then at this point we can go ahead and invoke the print statement function and I can see there is a mistake I made in print statement, but we are okay. Let's just continue. Next, demo number 3. In demo 3, let's now see how the getters actually work. So in demo 3, I'll also need this part up to that point. So demo 3, getters in action. So this is account 3, and this one belongs to, let's call him James. Then we also change this to account 3. First things first, James is going to deposit. I'm just trying to make my work easier. So account 3. So James is going to deposit say 3,000. James is also going to deposit 750. So let's see how we excuse me, accessing through the getters and not directly. So in order for us to access through the getters, we're just going to have to add print line statements. So let's say the account holder first, then we're going to use account 3 to call the get account holder function. Number 2, account number, so we also invoke its getter. So account 3 excuse me, we call the get account number function. Then what was next? Balance was next. So balance, so account 3, call the get balance function. Then finally, how many times does this particular person transact? So transactions, excuse me, get transactions there. Then let's just add an empty line below there. So that is demo number 3. In demo number 4, we had setters as well. Where we had actually we had one setter. We had one setter for the account holder. Let's see how that one works. So in demo 4, let's say setter in action, not setters because we don't have a lot. So I'll just copy that part. So demo 4, and then just one setter in action. So this is going to be account number 4, and let's say this is Mary. So that's Mary. So actually, before we get to that, since we're talking about the setter, let's how can we work with it without creating a new object? Let's say we use the previous object, account 3. So let's call the set account holder function, and this is going to be Mary. That is the name we had chosen to use. Then remember there was some validation that we had added, and the validation was stating that it is impossible for us to have a null empty. Actually, both empty and null. So if we come here and pass null, that's also not allowed. And then let's probably try and call the print statement function there. Okay, so in our previous the code that I deleted when we began, we had a problem that we were trying to address, and basically that problem, allow me to just copy this, that problem was where we were talking about allowing a negative balance to be deposited, which according to what we have done so far up to this point, that's not allowed. The old problem that we had, I'll just paste that. This is demo 5. Let me just call it old problem. So right now it's not allowed. So let me just say account 5. I'm going to skip 4 even though we don't have account 4. So this is going to be account number 5, and let's say this is Sandra. Now this is what we had initially, account 5, and then we call the instance variable. Actually we can't directly call the instance variable right now. Let me see, because it is private. There is no outside access currently, so there is no outside access currently, but this is how it was 0.0 maybe. First thing that you'll notice is that we have an error right here. If you point to it, the field bank account.balance is not visible. Simply put, there is no outside access. So in our earlier problem, we have now solved it successfully. So the only way that we can access the balance is through the methods, and that is how we get to protect the data. So you either call deposit, you call withdraw, but currently, since we are talking about adding some amount in the bank account, we can only call the deposit function. So I'll just disable this because at present it is not helping us. Then let me just put my console up again. We'll rerun it. Okay, till I had forgotten to save. Okay, if we start with demo 1, we were okay. Demo 1 was fine because in demo 1 it was just the normal usage. In demo 2, we were attempting to break. There is demo 2. Demo 2 is right here. We were trying to break the account by depositing a negative figure and withdrawing a 0. So first things first, the deposit failed because the amount must be greater than 0. We were attempting to deposit a negative 500. So this was the getters in action. That one was also okay. In demo 4, the setter in action. So the account holder name has been updated to Mary, and since we were using the account 3 previously, we had James. Then when we try to add something empty, it cannot be empty. When we try to add null, it cannot be null. That was okay. Now the other problem that we're going to solve in the next lesson is right now we have just one type of account, but a savings account earns interest. A student account has no fees. A business account has a higher limit. All those, they are all bank accounts, but they behave differently. So in part 3, we're going to build all three, those three that I have mentioned as examples, and then we're going to do it without rewriting a single line of today's code. Thank you for following along. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and remember to subscribe. Until next time.